Hi, fourth graders. Today's lesson is on comparing fractions. Our learning target is I can compare and order fractions. These are the symbols we'll be using to do that. So the symbols we need to know are these. When comparing any numbers, whether they're whole numbers like the number 1 or 2, or fractional numbers like 3/4, we use these symbols. So this symbol is less than, this symbol is greater than, and this symbol is of course equal to. And I have a couple tricks for helping you remember that. So, the way I remember less than is that this symbol looks kind of like the L turned. So this one does not, because your L goes this way and it's going the opposite way. So I know that if I see a symbol that looks like a crooked L, I can read that as less than. If it doesn't look like a crooked L, it's greater than. And then of course we know equal to. So I have a number set here of 3 and 5. And of course we know that 5 is greater than 3. So if the teacher gave you a problem like that, you would have to fill it in with a symbol to make the sentence true. So the way we do that is we put them in any order. It doesn't matter if you put the 3 or the 5 first, but what does matter is that the symbol is, I like to say it's eating the bigger number because it's really hungry. So I kind of drew some little choppers on here so that you can tell that he's eating the bigger number. The symbol will always face the bigger number of the two. So this sentence, let's see, can you see that? Would not be true because you're saying that 3 is greater than 5, and we know that 5 is greater than 3, so that's wrong. And when we're reading the number sentence, so if I were to switch this around, actually I can just do it this way. So I can look and see that this does look like my crooked L. If my L goes that way, that does look like my crooked L. So the way I would read that is 3 is less than 5. If I switched it and did the 5 first, and of course we have to be eating the bigger number, I could read it 5 is greater than 3. That doesn't look like a crooked L, so I wouldn't say less than. 5 is greater than 3. So those are some tips for not only making the number sentence, but for how to read it once it's written. Here's another example using a whole number, 1, and a fraction, 1/2. So we know, of course, that 1 whole is greater than a half. So it's eating that bigger number, it's facing the bigger number, and the way we would read this, it's not a crooked L, so 1 is greater than 1/2. If we switched it and wrote the 1/2 first, we have to have our symbol facing the bigger number. He's hungry. So we would read it 1/2, and there we see our crooked L. So 1/2 is less than 1. I hope these little tricks help you with remembering those symbols because they can be tricky, and you can rewatch it as many times as you need to. All right, so one way to help you when comparing fractions is to think about benchmarks to compare. A benchmark is basically any easy number for you to think about. So when we're thinking about fractions, an easy fraction to think about is 1/2. We can compare all the fractions we know to 1/2. So that's why it's a good benchmark to use. So when comparing fractions, think to yourself, just like this little person's thinking, is it smaller than 1/2 or larger than 1/2? And the answer to that question will help you compare them. So I have an example here, and you're going to see this kind of a problem a lot in your bookwork, a lot on tests, map tests, just different things like that. So if your teacher or your book asks you to compare this pair of fractions and then write a number sentence using these symbols, I'm going to show you how to do that. So our pair of fractions is 3/4 and 1/3. So we can write that out. and we can use we're going to put either greater than, less than, or equal to in the middle. So we can use that benchmark of 1/2 to help us. So on page 336 in your math book, you can use that to help you. So if we think about 1/2 as being right here, so we have 3/4 and 1/3. 3/4 is right here. From here to here, 1, 2, 3/4. 1/3 is right here. Okay, so 1/3, I have to think to myself, is 1/3 smaller than or larger than 1/2? And I can see that it's smaller than 1/2. And I think to myself again for that other number, 3/4. Is it smaller than 1/2 or larger than 1/2? And I can see that 3/4 is larger than 1/2. So I'm going to have my symbol eating the bigger number. And the way we read this is 3/4 is greater than 1/3. We'll do a couple other examples. Or I guess one other example. So here's those directions again. Compare these pairs of fractions. Write number sentences using the greater than, less than, or equal to symbols. So our pairs are 2/5 and 7/10. So if we look at our fraction chart, and I hope you can see this, 2/5 is our first number. So I'm going to find 2/5 and look and see if it's smaller than 1/2 or bigger than 1/2. And I can see here, if 1/2 is right here, I can see that 2/5 is smaller than 1/2. And then my other number is 7/10 up here. So I'm going to find 7/10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7/10. I can see that 7/10 is larger than 1/2. So that can help me write my number sentence. So I know now that 2/5 is less than 7/10. So I'm going to draw my symbol eating the bigger number. And if I wanted to do it the other way, I could do that too. So if I happen to write this number first, it really doesn't matter as long as you get the symbol right. So if I wrote 7/10 first and 2/5 second, I just got to make sure that it's eating that bigger number, but I'm just going to read it differently. So this one I read 2/5 is less than 7/10. This one I read 7/10 is greater than 2/5. They both mean the same thing. You can say it either way. So now it's time for you to try. So in the practice work part of your notebook, or I'm sorry, your note catcher, I want you to try these two problems. So same directions as up here. You're going to write number 1 and your pair of numbers, your pair of fractions. So the fractions are 1/4 and 1/2. So you're going to write 1/4, leave a space to write either greater than, less than, or equal to, and fill that in. So I'd like to see all of this. Number 2, you're going to do 3/6 and 2/4. And you can write it like this, 3/6 and then a blank spot or a box, or you can just leave it blank and then fill it in with either greater than, less than, or equal to 2/4. Those are your two practice problems. There is no vocabulary for this lesson, so you just have those two practice problems and you have a summarize. Here's what I would like you to do for your summarize. You can think back to the lesson I just taught you and answer the question, how can you compare two different fractions? And then I actually want you to start your sentence by writing, I can compare fractions by blah, blah, blah. So fill in that blank there. And then, of course, if you have any questions, write down those specific questions and come to class with them. And that's it for this lesson.